Hi, folks. I'm Jeffrey Darty, the Christian Whistleblower, and this is Apostle Paul Antichrist. And before we go any further, I'd like to encourage you to go ahead and like this video. I'd like to encourage you to share this video, and I would like to encourage you to go ahead and subscribe to this channel so you can keep abreast of all of the important work and information that we're doing here for you. We want you to be able to grab onto this. We want you to be able to hold on to this. We want you to be able to get this into your thinking realm. We want you to be able to understand this and know this, and we want you really to be able to be a person that's able to study the scriptures on your own and unindoctrinate yourself. And we're starting to wrap up and wind up the whole story of Apostle Paul Antichrist, at least going through the book. And you can get the book in the description box below. But Apostle Paul Antichrist was written in a novel form to make you be able to understand the story, but it's very factually based, has a good bibliography, and you're able to really understand it. If you want just the facts without the novel type story, then you can get Final Message of the Last Apostle, another one of our books, which gives you more just the facts and not so much of the storytelling. But it's both ways for you, because some people learn one way, some people will, of course, learn in another way. But when we last left the subject, Paul had just killed James. And at that time, James was the leader of the Apostolic Church, the Christ having already moved on. And James took a very different role and a different line with Paul. I think it's because James was there when Paul came and came as the rich young ruler to the Christ. And he heard the Christ say, "Look, sell all you have and come follow me." And in my estimation, and this is in Apostle Paul Antichrist or the Final Message of the Last Apostle, and we do have, just searching for my mute button, still trying to get over the creeping crud. We have, different places where you can find all of this information. And of course, we have a lot of videos. What the hell? About it too. So at any rate, you can find all this information. And he came to the Christ, and of course the Christ said, "Hey, look, sell all you have, come follow me." In my estimation, that was a legitimate, true, and real offer of apostleship to Saul of Tarsus. And I think that really affected James very profoundly, because I think James saw Saul of Tarsus as someone that the Christ had, for whatever reason, whatever motivation, had identified as being worthy of the at least a tryout of apostleship, to come and follow them and see what would happen with his life. Now, of course, that did not happen. We understand that. But this probably, in my opinion, accounts for James' patience. James trying to work with Paul. James trying to woo Paul. James trying to not rue Paul, but woo Paul. I don't think James tried to work with RuPaul. Probably would have, but I don't think RuPaul was there in the first century of Jerusalem. But anyway, he tried to woo Paul, and finally, that strategy ended up killing him, which is, of course, sad, tragic. But yet sometimes you just do what you do, and you go out being who you are, being what you are. So I don't think anyone else can write the end of your story. Well, someone can write it, but no one else can really comment on the end of your story. No one can say whether you're a success or not. And I think at the end, you just go out doing what you do, being who you be. And that's another story, isn't it? But anyway, it killed James. And once James was off the scene, then Peter was the leader of the Apostolic Church. And Peter had quite a different tack than he took with Saul of Tarsus, aka the self-proclaimed Apostle Paul. And I always say self-proclaimed Apostle Paul because of the nearly 200 times that Paul is called an apostle in the New Testament. It's only him calling himself an apostle. The only time that someone other than Paul called Paul an apostle was in Revelation chapter 3, where they called him a false apostle. So there you go. But Peter, remember, had been confronted by Paul, disrespected by Paul, called out in front of the entire congregation by Paul, and went back and told James, forget this fool. And then when Paul killed James, Peter took it into his own hands to let the whole world know about Paul. And Peter wrote in 2 Peter chapter 3, right around verse 16, which is interesting because 3:16 to a Christian, they automatically think John 3:16. So it has a very, it's very resonant, it's very important. It seems, and it's very real to Christian people. And there's reasons why 2 Peter 3:16 contains such a pivotal passage about the self-proclaimed Apostle Paul. And I'm just going to quote it for you because I want you to concentrate and I want you to do your own research. And it's interesting because it's this subject, this scripture, more than any other, that I'll get people that disagree with my message about Paul, calling my attention to, saying, hey, well, what about 2 Peter chapter 3? Well, in 2 Peter chapter 3, I believe it's verse 14, Peter talks about our beloved brother Paul. And some people aren't sophisticated enough to read the rest of the verse. They just see our beloved brother Paul, and that's all they want to read. But as you go ahead and read the rest of the verse, it says, our beloved brother Paul, as he always does, writes in his epistles of things that are, King James says, hard to understand. And because of these things, the ignorant, the people that don't know, and also those that just don't want to learn, wrestle these scriptures, use these scriptures, like a cowboy riding a bull. They ride it to their own destruction. Interesting, it doesn't say their own hellfire, but they ride it to their own destruction. So if you're lazy, or if you don't really want to know, and if you just want to listen to what you're told, stay inside your comfy, lay me down to sleep, pray the Lord my soul to keep, bless this food, kind of easy rockabye baby religion, then you don't read any further. You just, oh, beloved brother Paul, that must be. But if you get into the Greek, you can see that Peter saying our beloved brother Paul is absolutely dripping with sarcasm. Absolutely, completely, totally dripping with sarcasm. And here's why. Because when he says that Paul writes his epistles, as he always does. Now, this isn't something that Paul sometimes does. This isn't something Paul one time did. This isn't something that Paul had a predilection to do now and again. This is something that Peter said Paul always does. Always means all the time, every time. And all the time, every time, Paul writes in his epistles things, the King James says, which are hard to understand. You look that up in the Greek, and it says things which are ill-minded. Ill-minded. Peter, the apostle that walked with the Christ for 3 years or so, said that Paul was ill-minded. Modern English, Paul was sick in the head. All Paul's writings, every time, every word, all the time, Peter says, came from someone that was sick in the head. Crazy, loony, banana pie, psychopathic. He had just killed James. It makes perfect sense that he called him sick in the head, ill-minded. So it's up to you. If you want to follow someone who's sick in the head, if you want to believe someone that's sick in the head, if you want to base your faith on someone that's sick in the head as identified by an apostle, sounds to me like you're sick in the head and you need to unindoctrinate yourself.